I have always had a complicated relationship with memory. Even as a child, I was too aware, maybe, that remembering is an act as unreliable as it is necessary. Sometimes I'd walk into a room, feeling certain I'd spent hours there before, only to realize I was remembering something from a dream. I'd see a face in the grocery store, smile instinctively, then spend the rest of the day convinced I'd greeted a stranger with a warmth meant for someone else. Memory, I learned early, could be both traitor and friend in the space of a single heartbeat. This unease sharpened as I got older. There's that moment in life when you realize you've started to live more in your recollections than in your expectations. You replay that perfect afternoon in your 20s, sunlight through the trees, the feeling of a lover's laughter somewhere just behind you, the delicious glow of unspent days ahead. But then, over the years, something odd happens. The details become stickier, almost suspicious in their vividness. I might ask myself, was the sunlight really that saturated? Did we really laugh about that particular joke, or have I, in the retelling, inadvertently revised the script? These questions haunted me, a persistent background noise. I tell you all this because I became obsessed, quietly at first, with the possibility of outsmarting my own memory. Not just improving it, like the champions who memorize decks of cards or grocery lists, but outmaneuvering its tricks, its edits, its elisions, its artistic license. I wanted to see, if only for myself, whether I could build a life not held hostage by the imperfect record-keeping of my mind. Part of this impulse came from my grandfather. He kept a box on a high shelf in his study, labeled "Do Not Open," even for me. He called it his memory safe. He filled it, he said, only with things he wanted never to forget. The stub from the first concert he saw with my grandmother, a black and white photo of a dog that had once saved his little brother, the letter he'd carried in his pocket every day he was at sea in the war. But, he told me, he never opened the box. "It isn't for remembering," he said. "It's for reminding me what I could forget." At the time, I thought this eccentric, a private joke. Now, I think my grandfather was trying to outsmart his own memory by making peace with its unreliability. He trusted himself better if he didn't let himself become too certain about the past. As a child, I found this comforting in the way only paradox can be, to store something in order not to need it, to love your memories but never dare to trust them. It seems to me now that all of us spend our lives caught between these two poles, the need to remember, to stitch our lives into something resembling a narrative, and the certainty that, even in the telling, our story begins to shift. Memory shapes us, but it cannot be held still. It mutates with our moods, our regrets, our longing to find patterns or absolution in the chaos of living. As I moved into adulthood, I started trying out tricks of my own. I made lists, filled journals with notes so meticulous that, rereading them years later, I could practically smell the ink. I snapped photos, not because anything remarkable was happening, but as an insurance policy. Surely, if I could capture enough documentation, I could fortify myself against the erosion of time. I even got a tiny handheld recorder, and some nights, after coming home late from a party or a midnight walk, I'd record whatever seemed precious or strange, a conversation, the creak of the stairs, the way the wind sounded as I shut the door. But what I couldn't have guessed was how quickly assurance turns to excess. The more I tried to catalogue, the more unmoored I became from the simple act of living. Whole days passed when I was so busy making sure I'd remember what happened that I barely experienced what happened at all. Memory, the act of curating, became a kind of performance. I became a ghost in my own archive, waving at myself through a camera lens, scribbling down my thoughts as if I were evidence in a crime scene I hadn't even committed yet. At its heart, the problem of memory is inseparable from the problem of identity. Who are we but what we recall of ourselves? There's an odd comfort in realizing that every person you've ever been, a sullen teenager, a lovesick 20-something, a harried parent, a wanderer in a new city, is only partially accessible. Our past selves are like actors who have already struck the set and gone home, leaving a few costumes and some scuffed makeup behind. No amount of evidence, no photograph, no diary, no scientific reconstruction will quite summon them. I find myself returning to these questions most urgently during periods of change, moving to a new city, losing someone I love, standing at the edge of a new chapter. In these moments, my brain seems to scrape feverishly through the file drawers, looking for precedents, reminders of how I've survived uncertainty before. But here's the trick: my mind doesn't retrieve original events, not exactly. It fetches the story I've built around those events, a kind of mythology. The memory isn't a record, but a rehearsal. Each time I recall, I rewrite. Am I comforting myself, I wonder, or simply erasing the jaggedness that made the memory important in the first place? Last spring, after the loss of a friend, I found myself walking the same loop in the neighborhood park every evening, half hoping, half dreading that I might bump into him coming the other way. I tried to remember our last conversation, thinking I could replay it, word for word. But it was slippery, evasive. I had the shape of it, the echo, but the actual words were gone, replaced by feelings, or maybe just the wish to believe we had said the right things. I cursed my memory for its inadequacy. But then, one chilly dusk, I realized that I was less afraid of forgetting the conversation than I was of remembering it exactly, because the exactness would bring the loss into sharper relief. Perhaps my mind was protecting me in its flawed, generous way. Is this act forgetting by degrees, smoothing over the harsh edges, so terrible? I don't know. I've come to suspect that memory's slipperiness serves a purpose, refusing to pin me down too precisely to any particular grief or joy. Life is always a little out of focus, and so, mercifully, are its recollections. Even the sharpest pain is softened by time, the most brilliant happiness gently muffled by the drapery of years. Still, the hunger to remember, truly remember, persists. Last year, I found myself at one of those amateur trivia nights, the kind where everyone is a little drunk and eager to prove they haven't wasted their lives. The final round: in what year did this or that happen? I was certain, absolutely certain, it was 1995. But the answer turned out to be 1994. My friends jeered, but what struck me wasn't the embarrassment. It was the startling realization that my own mind could misplace an entire year with such confidence. Memory, I thought, has zero obligation to accuracy. Afterwards, I recalled the story of a British psychologist I had once read about, who kept a memory diary for decades, documenting every day what he believed had happened the day before. The differences, the gaps, grew wider as he aged. But, curiously, what most disturbed him was not getting facts wrong, it was the confidence with which he remembered things that had never occurred at all. He started to see that the act of remembering is not retrieval, but invention. I sometimes wonder, could I do what my grandfather did? Could I lock my most precious memories away, never peeking, simply trusting the knowledge that they are there to be recalled, or not, as life demands? What would it mean to pursue forgetting as an act of wisdom, rather than fail in the world around us? Memory is always presented as a test of loyalty, of affection. We prize those who remember birthdays, anniversaries, what kind of tea we like best. We're haunted by the stories of lost memory, of disease, of trauma, of the gradual and inexorable dimming of the light. But even as I fear forgetting, I'm starting to see its utility. To forget, sometimes, is to forgive. To forget is to slough off a brittle skin, to become lighter and less certain for a while. But then, on a late August afternoon not long ago, I had a moment that tested my newfound comfort with uncertainty. I was alone in my apartment, leafing through some old boxes. At the bottom of one, I found a postcard I'd written to myself at age 16, a class assignment, never sent. It was simple stuff. The preoccupations of a teenager, hopes, fears, a favorite song. But there was also a strange kind of calm to it, as if the younger me had been writing not only to recall the past, but to beckon a future self he could not yet imagine. For a moment, I felt the distance between us collapse. The room was, improbably, filled with the sunlight of another year. I was both myself and not myself. The boundary between memory and imagination briefly dissolved. I didn't feel nostalgic, exactly. It was more like relief that the person I was then had tried, even in vain, to reach the person I am now. Perhaps that is the true magic trick of memory, not accuracy, but connection. Not perfect recall, but the ongoing, mysterious negotiation between our many selves. In this way, I finally began to understand the real challenge of memory. It isn't to outsmart it in any technical sense. Cataloging, documenting, archiving, all of that can only ever give us the data, not the experience. Memory is, finally, about the stories we tell ourselves to make the chaos of life bearable, meaningful, endurable. Whatever tricks we play in an effort to control it, memory will always slip through our fingers, smiling slyly as it recedes into the fog. But I do think we can meet it halfway. We can live with enough attention that, even if the specifics blur, the feeling, the warmth, the ache, the wonder remains. Like the faint outline of a cherished photo long since faded, it's not the detail that keeps us, it's the glow. I wonder sometimes what it would be like to meet all the versions of myself I've forgotten, if they would recognize me, if I would recognize them. Would we embrace, or would we be strangers passing on a street, giving each other that peculiar smile of almost recognition? The idea comforts me, in a way. It suggests that forgetting is not the end, but part of an ongoing conversation between who we were, who we wanted to be, and who we stubbornly are. And so I have stopped trying to outsmart my memory in the way I once did. Instead, I strive for a kind of gentle partnership, living as though every moment is both precious and entirely provisional, meant to be cherished, perhaps, but never fully grasped. I trust that some details will slip away, changed by time or rain or the simple limitations of my mind. But what remains, the core of feeling, the simple thread of connection, will be enough. And isn't that a real gift? To know that, while memory may be an imperfect companion, it is also a creative one. It revises, reinvents, recomposes, and in doing so, it helps us keep becoming, keep reaching, keep forgiving ourselves for all we fail to remember. I still keep a box, not on a high shelf, but somewhere I can see it. Sometimes, I add a scrap of paper, a photograph, a small token. I almost never look inside. It is both a safeguard and a surrender, an acknowledgement that, while I will never outrun the shifting tides of recall, I can choose to greet my memories, when they surface, with curiosity instead of suspicion. I can invite the past to sit beside me a while, knowing it will eventually slip away again, lightening my load as it goes. Maybe, in the end, that's the best anyone can hope for, to walk with memory as a companion, not a jailer. To love the stories we've told ourselves, without needing to swear they happened exactly as we recall. To forgive the mind its vagaries, its kindnesses and betrayals, and to live with the knowledge that we are not the sum of what we remember, but the sum of what we have felt and the hope of what we might yet feel again.